Welcome to this podcast, My Positive Birth, a little corner of the internet where I will be collecting positive stories from women birthing their babies across the UK. My name is Lisa. I'm a doula in southwest London. I have 3 children and 2 positive birth stories. I truly believe that we can all learn so much by listening to the positive stories of women and families who have gone before us. What their birth experience was like, what they did, how they felt, how they feel now a few months or even years later. So come and surround yourself with positive birth stories, told in women's own words. And I hope you'll find a village here to calm you, but also to inspire you and give you confidence in birth. All women and babies deserve a positive birth experience. So let's get cracking on today's episode. This week on the podcast, we are joined by Ella. Hello, Ella.
Hello there. Hi, Lisa.
And as usual, do you mind just telling me a little bit about who you are and your family?
Yeah, absolutely, sure. I am Ella, and my husband is Jules, and we have 2 boys, Noah and Finn. Noah just turned 3, and Finn is 7 months old, born in December, just gone.
Lovely. And so you've had 2 births. Could you just tell us, were they both positive experiences?
Yeah, I would say I would describe both of my births as positive. They were very different, but they were both positive. And I guess the reason I say that is because it resulted in the birth of both of my children, who are, thankfully both healthy and well. I have to say that both of them were positive.
Good. But you mentioned that they were quite different from one another. And I think, obviously, we've chatted a little bit before that you're going to focus on the birth of your second son. But I wonder, could you just set the context for us for that birth by just telling us a little bit about your first son and his birth?
Yeah, for sure. So Noah, he was a June baby, and he was a full-term baby. He was due to be born on the 17th of June, and he came on the 14th of June. So a few days early, and that was a planned C-section. The reason for it being a planned C-section, I had wanted a natural birth for kind of all of my pregnancies, but he was breech. He was bottom down breech. So the medical advice I was given, the conversations I had with kind of people who'd naturally worry about me, my husband, my mum, was generally pointing in the direction that the safest option was to have a planned C-section. I did and ah. I did want a natural birth. If my hospital could have guaranteed me a specialist breech midwife, I probably would have gone for that option if I could have kind of maybe met her, and if she was kind of saying that, I successfully do this, regularly, and could have had that positive feedback that was something like it was going to likely to be a kind of happy, healthy outcome. But I remember some of the information when I asked about, the midwives that specialize in breech births, is a natural birth possible? They were kind of always saying, you couldn't go for it. Like, it's your choice, it's your body. We can't force you to have a C-section. But they certainly weren't recommending that and encouraging that. The medical advice was quite clearly for the C-section due to the risks. I kind of understood, I think through my own personal research at the time, that, breech birth used to just be another presentation, and, breech babies were delivered, left, right and centre. But unfortunately, that kind of, expert, it used to be everyday knowledge has kind of sadly died out. And midwives have become less specialist in that. And there's kind of, I guess, now more of a medicalisation of breech births, and C-section is the kind of go-to when the baby won't turn or can't be turned, or doesn't turn. So in that sense, I suppose it wasn't my ideal choice of birth, but it's the kind of the choice that I felt that I had to make to ensure that, myself, my husband, my mum, everybody felt okay with it, and that my child was born, safely, basically.
Yeah. And how was the actual experience of the Caesarean?
Well, quite hilariously, by coincidence, I actually went into labour spontaneously anyway. So we literally kind of, literally turned the lights off. Like it literally was like flick the switch, get into bed. Oh, we're going to get up at kind of 5 a.m., 6 a.m. to go to the hospital because I was the first C-section of the day. And literally kind of my waters broke. So I kind of turned the light back on, got out of bed, kind of identified, is this actually my water's breaking? What on earth is this? Oh yeah, no, that's your water's breaking. And off we went in the car quite promptly. So that was quite a funny little interlude. So we were actually in the triage at kind of 1 a.m. when we were planning to be in the hospital till 6 a.m. and stayed there overnight with me in labour. But because I wasn't progressing, like in terms of dilating, I could just kind of wait it out and hang around until my scheduled time. So I went in at the scheduled time. They didn't have to bring it forward. And he was born about 9:30 a.m. But it was Queen Charlotte's Hospital, which I hugely rate. Both my children have been born there. I really do think their maternity services are rated up, outstanding, and they really, in my view, are outstanding. I know people have different experiences at different hospitals, so I cannot speak for anyone but myself. But honestly, the hospital porter, the surgeons, the anaesthetists, the midwives, the maternity assistants, everybody was, absolutely exceptional in their care. And we got to choose like a playlist, and he was born to song we had at our wedding. So that was kind of like lovely little kind of thing that they kind of did for us, to put that song on as he was born. And they were just super calm, super professional, super friendly. And, as much as one can say, through birth, I felt relaxed kind of from beginning to end pretty much, and in really safe hands. And obviously when you get the baby in your arms, you don't really remember necessarily how they were born, and that doesn't seem so important anymore. However, saying that, obviously in like kind of what we're talking about today, that wasn't my first choice, of what was to happen, but it was it was a happy outcome, and Noah was, a very healthy, happy little baby. So it was all good. But that's why I wanted to go for a VBAC birth, if possible, with my second, which is what happened.
Just my last question on that. How was your recovery from the cesarean?
It was now I've had the comparable experiences of a C-section and a VBAC. It was, it is a proper operation. Not being able to kind of get out of bed for, I think it was the first 12 hours or 24 hours. I remember kind of being like, oh, I'll get up now, and being like, oh no, I actually literally cannot. And that's when it kind of dawned on me. I think I was very much focused on the baby. That was obviously the thing taking up all of my headspace, but it's that point of like reflecting now and looking back and thinking of myself that I was bedridden for a few days. That is quite a mad thing, and I guess that highlights that the C-section is very much, a proper operation, and the recovery physically was quite grueling, I would say. I remember doing my little kind of like padded walk, and I remember testing my first little walk round there, and being quite shocked at how difficult I found it, how out of breath I was, and it wasn't painful because I was literally dosed up to the eyeballs on painkillers, and that was very helpful. But yeah, I remember being like, wow, this is a real physical undertaking. A C-section felt very incapacitating at times.
Yeah, and women just aren't, it's not respected in the way. If you had major abdominal surgery at any other time in life, you would be signed off work, wouldn't you? You'd be on the sofa, everyone would be. Whereas instead it's like, oh, here's this human, and you've also got to look after them at the same time. So yeah, something to be respected, the kind of need for that recovery. But obviously you did recover well, because let's move on to finding yourself pregnant again, or the conception, or whatever you want to start your story.
Yeah, so I think we kind of tried getting pregnant again, kind of, whenever that was, 2 years, 6 months, minus 9 months, whatever that was. We're definitely ready for another one. Knew we always wanted more than one, so that was kind of an easy decision. And I think we got pregnant at a similar, kind of pretty much similar time frame to the first. So it was a kind of similar journey of conception. I was very lucky in both my pregnancies. In my first pregnancy, I had a very hilarious, very intense 48 hours morning sickness over a best friend's wedding where I was a bridesmaid. So that made for quite a hilarious day of kind of, vomiting in kind of empty ice buckets and, like the bushes of kind of like secreting kind of, my friend got me a cardboard box from some of the caterers, and I just had that under the table. It was that kind of thing. So that was quite funny. But that was my only period of morning sickness. And I know some people suffer really badly, so I'm very grateful that it was a baptism of fire for a very small window of time. And then it was over. But with my second pregnancy, I literally had no morning sickness at all. And it was just a very, I must say, I really enjoyed being pregnant and had two really happy, easy, touchwood pregnancies, and didn't have any kind of complications or health issues, which I guess maybe built my confidence up for the VBAC situation. Perhaps if there were other curveballs or health issues or, other things that happened along the way in the pregnancy that made it not so easy, I can imagine maybe, or maybe I should be in labour ward and, or maybe that would be safer and, especially if you're on medications and things like that throughout pregnancy. But I think because that wasn't kind of, part of my experience, I think my confidence built throughout the pregnancy. What if this kind of bill of health continues and if there are no concerns for baby's weight? And I think there was a funny moment of them thinking they would breach again. And then they realised at the end it wasn't breach, which was the opposite. They thought, no, it wasn't breach. And then right at the end, I had a private scan and we found out he was breach. So that was funny. It was the other way around. But yeah, so finally, when we got to kind of the end of the pregnancy and you have to make those decisions about, where am I going to give birth? And, I remember the nurse, I remember the doctor saying in my, I think it wasn't, I don't know if it was even 40 weeks. I think it was my 38 week or whichever appointment that is, 39 week, whichever one, shall I give you a sweep? And I was like, no, no, I'm okay. I'm not 40 weeks plus one or anything. So no, I'm fine. I'm going to wait it out. And it was just funny, the kind of, I can do that for you. And I think it's only because I read just on the bus on the way there, what is a sweep? Just because I had a sense that they'll talk about it, or perhaps I'll even be offered about it. And it is a medical intervention, but just the kind of casualness with which it was presented. Maybe if I hadn't done that very, very brief bit of reading that taught me, no, it's not necessary. It is a medical intervention. You don't need it for any other reason than, maybe if you're really late on, still wanting a natural birth and things really aren't happening and it's getting really late in the day. So I'm very glad I read that on the way, because maybe otherwise I'd have been oh, okay, yeah, if that's what you kind of is routine, let's go for it. But I was no, I'm okay. I don't want to sweep yet. So I didn't have one. And I went more down the natural route post that point.
What had been the kind of thought process in terms of, whether you would go for a vaginal birth or a repeat caesarean? When did those thoughts start in your head, and when did those conversations start with the midwives?
I think I asked the midwives throughout, am I a candidate for one? I think it was a bit dependent on who you spoke to. You got a different answer. But I do remember the most useful conversations not necessarily being my named midwife, who I would say she was fine, but it wasn't an amazing kind of connection. It was just kind of a bit more a little bit more kind of procedural, and obviously they're extremely busy, so often it has to be procedural. But a very lovely lady who I believe may have been the head midwife of the birth centre, or she was quite a kind of important role in the hospital in the birth team. And I remember she really put the hours into calling me. I remember having about almost an hour's conversation with her in my car one night after work, deciding about where I wanted to give birth, what kind of birth. And when I decided, which I think was probably pretty late on, I'm quite I think I'm a bit more of an instinctual person. I don't make decisions hugely through rational thought and research. I'm more kind of a feeling, intuitive person. And I kind of was intuiting that, let's go for this natural birth. I've read a bit, I've talked a bit with people, midwives, friends and family. A lot of what I've read is pointing towards, trust yourself, trust in your own body, trust in your health, trust in all those things that, are pointing that you can have a natural, healthy delivery. And probably one of the key things I should mention, which is a book I rave about to everyone and which I sent to a friend recently who had even a home birth, which was amazing, was Ina May's Guide to Childbirth. And I would say it was very transformative in my approach to birth, my understanding of how natural childbirth is, moving away, shifting away, maybe from that cultural to me view that maybe somewhere we kind of somewhat view kind of the birth, birth now as something that kind of happens to you through kind of doctors and nurses and midwives and hospital kind of interventions. And actually the way that obviously she writes about it and kind of her crusade regarding promoting women's choices and promoting natural births without intervention unless necessary, it really made me feel confident and empowered about having a natural birth. So I would say, that book and George's, obviously personal, kind of cheerleading for me, was really very important. And it's funny that my husband only said after my VBAC and seeing it in action and being there and having the front row seats, like he personally thanked George for encouraging me as much as she did, because he said, like, even for him, it was like a very, we don't say better or worse, because obviously that wouldn't be fair on, the fact that, there are beautiful children born in different ways. So we're not going to say one birth was better, because it both resulted in them. But that natural magic quality, I guess, of a natural birth, it being kind of just like raw, visceral, animalistic nature at her finest, was, I think, what he found also quite like intoxicating and very kind of like invigorating and empowering. So it was interesting that he's a bit more cautious, very much a kind of guy that's like, well, if men give birth, I'm pretty sure it would be just only C-sections. He always says that, which makes me laugh. And as we know, they did pick the stronger sex for the job, so we can imagine that might be the case. But he was like, that was amazing. Basically, like, I'm so glad you pushed on the birth center natural birth thing and didn't just opt for a second C-section, because actually having seen it, like, that was wow.
Yeah, that's amazing. And how was he at the time? You said he was a little bit more cautious, but did you feel like you had his kind of full support even when you're pregnant before you'd given birth?
Yeah, he's fully supportive. He's very kind of, very egalitarian. He's a modern man. He's got feminist values. It's all good. But what was actually hilarious, I just feel like I should mention this because it's really funny. He went from like Mad Men to like Mad Men husband to like doula in like the flick of a switch. And basically, I was in labour all day at home, and my husband was working that day and has a job that's like a little bit, like high pressure sometimes. And there was a deal happening that was quite an important one, and so he was just on the phone all day about this deal, going on and on about doing it, running up and down the stairs. I'm just like wandering around, going to M&S, holding the edges of various sofas and tables, kind of moaning. My mum's there, like making me peanut butter and jam sandwiches. Like, I must have been about 16. Literally, I ate. That's another thing I would say. I ate so much in my labour, and I slightly do credit my high level of hydration and the huge level. Obviously, some people might not want to eat food, and that would be right for them. They'd be sick or feel sick, but I could eat, so I did eat. I ate my body weight in peanut butter and jam sandwiches, and I do think that contributed to possibly quite a quick, quite efficient birth at the end. So I recommend that as a side note. But yeah, he was pacing around, being like a kind of 1950s husband, kind of barely giving me a second glance, just kind of being like, yeah, go for it. Yeah, I'll be there in a minute. Yeah, no, great. Yeah, no, you're doing really well. Like, running up after the computer and back down and out on the phone and all of this, with my mum kind of looking a bit like, my mum's a very patient woman, patient of a saint, Mother Teresa, but I think even she was getting a bit pissed at the end, being like, when are you actually going to attend to your partner here, who is literally birthing your second child? What are you actually doing? And literally, when he'd finally done this deal, obviously he would have had to stop anyway, and we were talking about going to hospital maybe now, because the contractions were a bit more intense and a bit more close together, and I wasn't coping so well with the pain. He put down his kind of madman phone, his 1950s office phone, and he picked up his kind of his incense sticks and his joss sticks and his cushions and his candles, and he was like a new man, transformed for the moment. And I couldn't fault him from that point. But previous to that, I felt like I was in the 1950s for a bit, which was very amusing.
So you got to the end of pregnancy and you'd made this plan. Did you say you'd made a plan that you were going to go to the birth centre?
Yeah, exactly. They were saying kind of really ideally, like more of a maybe research-led or policy of the hospital is more like they'd like me on labour ward. I guess you'd say the risk-averse decision was they wanted me on labour ward. But obviously you are allowed to choose. You have the right to choose. And so having spoken to that nice head midwife person that I told you I spoke to, was very supportive and encouraging and just kind of provided the information. I think she was probably very experienced, so she knew my job's not to persuade one way or the other. My job is to provide the scientific research, the information, lay it, my experience. She put all that stuff on the table and was kind of saying, we support you in whatever you choose. And I think having that sense that you could choose freely enabled me to choose the right thing. Whereas, of course, when you feel under pressure, that someone's saying, oh, it's your choice, but it's not really your choice, and people want you to do a different thing, sometimes you end up caving to that pressure, doing what you feel other people want you to do or what you should do, even though you don't feel that you 100% are in line with that decision. Then that might be when you kind of have feelings of like regret or maybe I should. I had friends saying, I just don't know why I went to hospital so quickly. Like, I think that's why I got induced, like everything was going really well at home. It was really smooth. I was doing this, I was in the bath, I was having walks, I was making sandwiches. And as soon as I went to hospital, my cervix kind of frozen, and the lights and the noise and the people and the questions and the environment just meant it wasn't conducive to my labour continuing as it did, and then I needed interventions, and then sometimes obviously that results in either ventouse or forceps or C-section.
Yeah, and choice, like you say, choice not always being as free as obviously this midwife obviously genuinely wanted to support you in your choices. Say, and just one other thing, because it was a VBAC and kind of uterine rupture, say the uterus splitting along the scar from the previous Caesarean birth. Was that, had you looked into that? Did the medical team explain much to you about that?
Yeah, so I remember they informed me of the same statistic, and I read the same statistic. So knowing that we were both singing from that same research-led hymn sheet of it is approximately a 1 in 200 risk of uterine rupture, I was like, well, if someone said I could be a millionaire from rolling the dice, and I know 1 in 200 chance, that I wouldn't be, 199 chance that I would be, I'm pretty sure I'd roll that dice, and that's how I looked at it. So I was like, yeah, so if I've got a 199 chance out of 200 that I'm that I won't have uterine rupture, I'm gonna roll with that, and so that felt to me like that's not a big risk we're talking about. It's a risk, like all things in this world. Things are a risk, some high risk, some low risk, but I'm very prepared to chance a 1 in 200 risk, even if it is to do with my own health, because I am at this hospital where I do majorly trust the staff. I've had a previous really positive experience, feel they're really professional. I feel like they're very just a very good hospital. And if the worst happens, yes, the transfer rate is, I think she said 7 minutes. So yeah, obviously 7 minutes is enough time for things to get quite serious, or, worst case scenario, but 7 minutes is still pretty quick. And I guess that could happen, in other pregnancy, labor related risks can occur that are completely unpredictable, but they know about this one, so they're going to be looking for it. They're going to be thinking this is a VBAC patient, looking for those signs of, if I'm saying, oh, I've got a lot of pain here, obviously they're going to be very alert to something like that if they think uterine rupture is a risk in there. So I was aware that maybe how to explain, the kind of the context was also relevant. I'm not just going in and they're blind as to kind of who I am, and I haven't had a previous pregnancy and wasn't C-section. They have all this information, and they'll be using that to keep me as safe as possible. And yeah, a 1 in 200 risk being quite low, that felt like worth taking.
So you were telling us, so the plan was in place, and then did you say it was around 38 weeks that the doctor started mentioning a sweep?
Yeah, what's the appointment with the doctor? What's the last appointment with the doctor? Or maybe first and last, I'm not sure. Is it 38 weeks?
I think not everybody would have one, so it might be slightly different, but probably around there.
Yeah, sorry, say again, what was the question? I just forgot now what you asked.
I was kind of picking up the story as to you've got to the very end of your pregnancy, you've got the plan in place. Just take us from there, really, that kind of doctor's appointment, declining the sweep, and then what happened after that.
So I remember doctor's appointment, and I remember at some point I found out that they did the acupuncture and the reflexology even, or just the acupuncture maybe, on the NHS now. That's part of the maternity kind of package, so to speak, if you want it. So I actually opted to book myself in for, I think I booked this, I didn't book an induction because I thought I'm not going to even acknowledge that unless I have to, because I really don't want an induction because I know all the stats on that. Don't want that. Sweep, okay, maybe a medicalized version of getting things going a little bit, but a bit more of a gentle version than okay, maybe I can consider that. So I think maybe I didn't book it. I found out when would be the date if I want one, because you can just it's more of a kind of like pop in thing. You don't have to book it in. You just pop in and, first come, first served. So they said, oh, this is the date you'd kind of be looking to have a sweep, no later than this date, I think they said. So I said, okay, if I've got that in my mind, what can I do before that to kind of get natural kind of labour on the go? And one thing was mentioned was reflexology and acupuncture, and I like alternative therapy anyway, so they put me in for that on the Friday. And then I think I spoke to one of my best friends who'd had a baby a couple of months ago and said, oh, how did you get things going with your labour? And she'd had reflexology. And so I thought, let me go for a reflexology session myself. I like reflexology anyway. So I went along for that, and she did some reflexology. She did some sacral work. This was he was born on the Wednesday, so this must have been on Tuesday. And the NHS acupuncture was going to be on the Friday, and sweep and induction was going to be kind of a little bit further down the line to the following week. And had my sacral, whatever she did, sacral rubbing, sacral action, which you can barely feel. It was like imperceptible sensation, but she had her hand kind of on my sacrum as I lay down on the bed. She had my hand kind of underneath my bum on that bone at the end, at the bottom of my spine, doing things, whatever magical things she was doing. Did the reflexology, and I felt the first twinges, I think, by 6 a.m. Was it 6 a.m.? I think it was 6 p.m. I thought, oh, something, maybe, who knows? And then throughout the night, that literal same night, I remember being like, yeah, I mean, I've been a neighbour before now because I had that previous experience of having gone into starting contractions, sorry. So I thought, oh, it's similar, maybe. But obviously, if you haven't experienced it before, you're a bit like Braxton Hicks or real, or I don't know. And that kind of carried on very lightly. I feel I was quite lucky on this front. It carried on very lightly throughout the night. And so obviously, being so light, these contractions, I got a full whack of sleep. And I think that was another thing I credit as potentially quite maybe a quick birth or a natural birth. I don't know how to, how far that went towards it. But sometimes I do think the stars align on certain things. And I think for me, the food, the hydration, having that full night of sleep, and then at 6 a.m. on the Wednesday, the next day after the reflexology, I was like, yeah, this is it. This is the first bit of kind of contracting. And they began, and they just got...
How many weeks were you then? Do you remember?
I was, what was I? 40 weeks and 6 days. Yeah, 40 weeks and 6 days, or 5 days, and then he was born 40 weeks and 6. And yes, so that was happening. And I took my son to school with my mum, because my mum had kind of moved. I think she'd come a couple of days before to kind of stay with us, to kind of just wait around, to be there for looking after my son when it all kicked off. And we went and took my son to nursery. I found it quite amusing that I was like having a chat about, I was going to get the staff some stuff for Christmas. I was just asking kind of, what will the staff like? And I found it quite like, that I was like having contractions and nobody knew. And I was still having a conversation. I felt like quite cool, quite proud of myself. And I was like, oh, I'm bossing this. And then we went to M&S to buy the staff's gifts. And then we walked home. And I must say, I do liken it to like a natural high. I felt like I was kind of slightly buzzing on the way home. I was like, this is a weird, when you start seeing people in like a weird way, like people would walk past, I swear they were like smiling at me. Or like, I felt like, I don't know, I was having some kind of weird embodied experience of feeling quite like alive, quite vital. The body was kind of in a kind of weird primed state, I don't know, primeval state. And so we walked home after nursery, and I think that was my last outing out. After that, I just stayed at home, and the contractions just got stronger and closer together throughout the day, and until that's when I had my peanut butter and jam sesh. Throughout the day, I ate weird stuff, salad, pasta, you name it. A lot of food was consumed. Never mind this worrying about pooing in birth thing. I was just like, I really couldn't care less about that. Like, I want maximum energy for this marathon that I'm apparently going to have to embark on shortly. And that was a great shout. And actually, I think it made them stronger. Funny, I felt like I was feeding the contractions. Like every time I ate more and more and more, they were kind of really going for it. And I remember them being long, they were more painful lying down, but further apart, that they slowed down. And when I stood up and walked around, they were slightly less intense, but they were closer together. So that was what we noticed. And I remember I wanted to rest as it got later on in the day, probably around 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, as they were getting tougher. I kind of also felt like I needed a bit of a rest and wanted to sleep. I couldn't sleep by that point because the pain was a bit much, but just lying down was like a nice rest. But then the pain would be quite strong lying down, so I'd have to stand up quite soon. So yeah, we did all the usual, tried to watch a bit of TV. I think I had a bath. And then when it got to, I think about 4, the conversations between like my mum and me and Jules got a bit more serious about, okay, maybe we need to go to hospital. My husband was actually quite supportive of like staying longer at home. And obviously, I think my mum was probably thinking about having to pick my son up quite soon from nursery. And also like maybe that, seeing me in quite a lot of pain was, not like her favourite thing, and that she'd quite like me to be like safely in hospital if that's where ultimately we're going anyway. So she kind of packed me off horizontally into the car at kind of 4:35. I at that point couldn't stand upright. I could only lie horizontal. So we'd let it get quite late on in the day. And I had a horizontal journey, put the front seat right back, completely reclined. So I was kind of like looking at the ceiling of the car and looking at the traffic lights at some weird kind of horizontal angle, seeing people on like the buses going out on their night out and kind of thinking like, this is quite weird situation to be in. And we had to stop a couple of times in the car park on the way to actually getting into the hospital for my contractions, because they were quite take your breath away by that point. But we went into the birth centre, and immediately, it's super calm, super zen. The lights were low. it's like one staff member, maybe two, who was like, oh yeah, hi, welcome, chilled, which I like because I'm quite a chilled person. So like, I feel quite anxious if people are angsty. So the fact that all these people were like super relaxed and obviously do this like 100 times a day was like, I like that. They showed us to this room. It had like this glorious, like lovely, I remember noting the cleanliness, being like, so clean, love it. Really clean, big white pool, candles all around the outside. Not real ones, sadly, but really good, pretty nice. And just like low lights, very kind of dark, almost a kind of hibernating kind of space, a safe space. And I remember being like, at that point, I was like, yeah, I know I've made the right decision to be here. I'm not into bright lights. I don't like strip lighting. It reminds me of school, stressful. I remember people trying to talk to me when I was in labour with my first son and being like, oh, it's annoying. Like, are these questions really necessary? Like, I don't know, talk to someone else, or, whereas nobody was asking me any questions. They were just very kind of efficiently, these kind of, reassuringly experienced looking midwives just saying like, you're going to poo, by the way, don't try not poo, please don't try not poo, pooing is good. Let your body poo, that's good. They're expelling something. We're pushing baby out, we're not keeping baby in. So, and I remember actually someone taking the time to just mention the pooing thing. Again, I just was like, oh yay, like, yeah, because obviously women do have that in the back of their mind as like, one probably hasn't pooed in front of someone. Don't want to make any judgments. Maybe people out there have, but I hadn't literally pooed in front of somebody after being a toddler. So in that sense, I was just like, oh, that's a really nice thing that you cared to mention. Maybe she thought sensitively. That's one of the things I always tell women, because I want them to just get that off their plate to start with. And then I remember her having a conversation with my husband and saying something like, he was like, oh, how long do you think we've got, kind of thing, like, where are we at, type thing. And I remember her saying, oh no, not for a while yet. This isn't established labour yet. And I remember thinking, well, it bloody feels like it. So what the hell does established labour feel like if this isn't established? And also, and she said, oh, she wouldn't be talking and she wouldn't be behaving like that if she was in established labour, because I was kind of still smiling a bit and joking and making conversation. And I remember thinking, you don't know, maybe I would. Fast forward 2 hours, see what she means. No, I was not laughing, joking, or making any form of conversation. Mainly kind of saying, oh God, I think was the phrase that I got looped onto.
And when you arrived at the birth centre, did they offer any sort of assessment of how far labour progressed? Or?
Do you know what? No, they did not. They did not. And I like that as well. They're like, it's all happening. I imagine they might have. Do you think they put the heart thing on? I can't even remember, to be quite frank, I can't remember any of that. I remember them showing me where everything was. I remember them telling me kind of useful information, but it was just really chilled. I remember them leaving the room pretty quickly and not coming back, which I liked. I didn't want them to hang around. I wanted to just be on my own with Jules. Yeah, still eating peanut butter and jam sandwiches. And that was really nice. So I think their relaxed attitude, that the kind of the confidence that they kind of imbued as to like, this is natural. This is normal. You don't need to be kind of checking things every 5 seconds. Do you feel well? Are you good? Do you need anything? No, I'm fine. Like, okay, well, maybe you want to hold off on getting in the pool just because, I did find out actually that they don't have the painkiller I thought they had. So that was quite a funny moment. I said, do you have, when can I have the pethidine, or when is that possible? And they were like, oh no, we don't have pethidine. I was like, I'm pretty sure I was told that birth has pethidine. In fact, that's kind of one of the reasons I'm here. And then they were like, no, we don't have that. But you could be transferred to labour ward, if you want that at any point. And I remember being like, damn it, I don't want to go to labour ward. Okay, now I can't have pethidine. Okay. I was like, well, what can I have? And they're like, gas and air, this pool. And I was like, oh, Jesus. Okay, fine. All right. So I remember I had to like slightly adjust my thinking to realizing that something I thought I could have painkiller wise was actually not on the menu. But actually, I'm very grateful for that, because actually I laboured without any pain relief until I really wanted to get in the water, and I just needed that next level of something to take a bit of the edge off. Climbing to the water was like amazing, orgasmic. I was just like, oh God, thank God I've opted for a water birth as well. This is amazing, like so soothing, so warm. And then right at the end, I think I transitioned by that point, and it was really the final pushes. I wanted it, or someone offered me, I think, the gas and air, and I took it. And I've been quite worried about that make me feel sick, because I really don't like feeling nauseous. That's not one of my favourite things. I think I prefer the physical pain, the nausea and physical pain. And actually didn't make me nauseous at all, or rather maybe I just had it at the right moment in the labour, because it was like really, really nice, just making you that bit woozy, kind of changing your perception of the world to just kind of take you out of the situation just a little bit to help you bear the pain. And are we allowed to call it pain? Do we call it pain? We're not meant to call it pain.
Call it whatever you like.
What did they say? Hypnobirthing? Forgotten. What did they say?
Yes, surges.
Surges, that's the word, surges. And my husband was doing the counting of the just as a distraction thing. I think that's why I liked it, just to do the distracting, counting me into the contraction and out of it. That was really good. And obviously at the end, he was doing some counting. I was like, shut up, stop counting. I don't want any more counting. Counting is not helping. He's like, right, okay, sorry, end of count. I was like, turn that thing off. I don't want to do that person anymore. He's like, right, okay, Bessie, we've got to that place. So yeah, the nice lady was talking to me and doing hypnobirthing with me on the CD or whatever we were CD. I've just got back into the past on whatever we were listening to. But yeah, that was not required for the final bit. Hypnobirthing had its endpoint.
And do you know how long was it from kind of arriving at the birth center to this kind of very final stage that you're talking about now?
It was pretty much exactly 3 hours. So they described it as quite a quick birth. Yeah, people were like, "Oh wow, that was quick." And also, he was £9.7, so he was big as well, and I'm quite small, and my husband's quite small, so they were also like, "That's very funny." Like you, they was like, "That's really cool. That's really great. Like you've done really well. Like a very successful VBAC. Like not much pain. Not that I'm saying that's what makes successful, not having much pain relief, but I was proud of myself for not having pain relief and hadn't wanted to feel sick of myself, and that hadn't happened. And the placenta kind of come out okay and everything in that regard. I feel like they don't make quite enough of the placenta. I did feel like, oh God, I have to give birth like again. But to be honest, obviously it doesn't quite compare. So even though it's still not the most pleasant experience, I was like, actually, yeah, I get it. This isn't as bad as giving birth to babies. That's fine. That needs to happen. Obviously looked like a murder scene. But they paid a lot of attention to sewing up. I had a second degree, nearly a third degree, and then she got a doctor down to triple check. It wasn't a third degree because she said that's not good if I sew you up and I've missed that it is a third degree. That can create a lot of problems. Doctor came down, no, definitely a second degree. She sewed up apparently really well. Really experienced midwife did that, who was really lovely throughout. And yeah, it was quite quick. So I'm really happy I stayed at home for as long as I did, because I do feel all of these factors played a part in it being that successful VBAC that it was for me, and part of it.
How is the kind of, I mean, they call it the second stage of labour, but I don't know how helpful these kind of terms are, but did you feel the kind of shift in your contractions when your body was actually like birthing your son? Did you push or did your body push?
I think I did. I pushed him out right at the end. I definitely was doing I pushed him out, but my body was doing the pushing up until the final bit. And actually, I was having a slight conversation in my head of trying to remember what I'd read in the Ina May's child. I couldn't speak, so there was no time to ask the midwife, or I couldn't ask my husband anymore. I was in a solo space that was not accessible anymore to the outside world in my mind. But I think I was trying to remind myself. What did the book say? Did the book say I genuinely don't have to push? Or, I think the midwife was not saying necessarily push. She was, but anyway, I kind of slightly confused myself at one point. I was like, is she saying push, or did the book say not push? Am I meant to be pushing? Am I pushing? I had a bit of a kind of confusion at one point. But what I did remember from the book, did it help? Did it not? No idea. But I remember that one of Ina May's recommendations to women giving birth was to imagine something opening, like a visualization, essentially. So like a flower opening. I remember all I could think of was a flower. So I just tried to keep imagining the petals opening and like revealing the center of the flower. And I just tried really hard to keep that visual in my mind, because I just felt probably it was just a helpful distraction, but also it was a positive visualization. It was a positive distraction because it was about opening, nature, natural, something's happening that's kind of a new beginning, all of that stuff. And I think that was quite good. And as I said, he was born very quick, and I don't think that last stage lasted particularly long. So perhaps again, all these things contributed to it being quite quick and easy. I don't want to say birth is easy. It's not easy, but it was so positive. That's the word that always comes to mind reflecting on it. It was so positive. Take me back to it in this moment. I'm not sure I'd say positive in that very moment, but like, of course, as everyone says, as soon as that baby's out, you are all forgotten. You never ever think back on it as probably anything other than positive. It's just this amazing memory, an amazing moment. So yeah, it was a quick one.
Yeah, and although I'm really interested, because obviously you did have quite a lot of build up to labour before you got to the birth centre, and in your mind, like, because I think often a lot of women will carry, when they say, "Oh, my birth was 48 hours," we kind of rightly are kind of claiming every single contraction, but obviously, which I think is really kind of helpful, you count that kind of labour at home as a slightly different experience. I talked about, there's a really lovely doula called Natalie Meddings, and she talks about the first room and the second room of labour. So she would say that bit where you're at home was kind of the first room of labour, and then, you know, it's not until you move into the second room that you're really going to meet your baby. But you just seem to do that very naturally, that you were sort of very calm and just taking everything in your stride when you were at home.
Yeah, and I do credit that. It has to be that book. It really was, because, you know, it's like a mental shift. You know, reading that book, I read it cover to cover. I read all the women's individual stories. I read the full book. I read, you know, what an amazing, you know, I really, anyone who's having a natural birth, I'd say the same as George said to me. Like, she gave me this book and said, you know, you must read this if you want a natural birth. Like, you know, it's really amazing. It's life changing. And, you know, I think she's completely right. That is an exceptional piece of writing, like a Bible. It's like, you know, she really, really knows her stuff. Like, her experience just kind of like seeps off the pages into you. You're like, wow, I'm learning from such an incredible woman about something so vital, so important. And I would just say that maybe I probably am quite a calm person anyway. Like, I probably am just maybe quite calm, but calm, anxious, or anything in between. Reading a book like that would only make you calmer. You know what I mean? So if you're anxious, there's even more reason to read it, if that makes sense. I'd amaze, but that would be like my absolute top recommendation, because I'm terrible at I'm terrible about remembering detail and facts, and so I just don't have that brain. So I'm so sorry that I can't be interesting and, you know, quote loads of interesting things out of it that would be interesting for podcasts. I just sadly don't have that brain. But I just remember like the kind of the energy of the book and the strength of her wisdom was just kind of very much like, I think she was writing in kind of the 1970s, and she was basically just kind of pioneering this move away from, you know, and in America, even more extreme than Britain, this medicalization of something that doesn't need to be medicalized, you know, just drawing people's attentions to some women have pain-free births. Some women have orgasmic births. Like, she's seen those things. She's seen them happen. It's not to say one will have a pain-free birth or an orgasmic birth. I would say mine was pain-free or orgasmic. But I know through reading and absorbing that book what she means, because I think actually the conversation around birth, I can only speak, you know, of this culture of which I'm part. I can't speak of other cultures that, you know, I'm not part of, but I feel is like very fearful and all about kind of like, oh, how much did it hurt? Like the first question, did it hurt so much? And it's like, why is our focus on those things? Like, that's so negative. That's so far from what this amazing magical experience is, because of course, you know, for most people, having their children is, you know, the most transformative experience in their entire lives. So to go straight to how much did it hurt physically, that is part of it. Pain, you know, the pain or whatever you want to label it is part of it, but it's not the entirety of it in any way, shape or form. You know, there's everything we've talked about already. There's a process like you asked about earlier of conceiving, you know, the journey into parenthood, those first discussions about do we want children, you know, obviously then having that child for the first like moment in your arms, which, you know, I get quite emotional to think about because it's just the most amazing experience. And then let's be honest, parenting starts from then when the baby's actually born and in your arms, and then the real job kind of starts. And that's kind of like a chapter closed, and the new one, the exciting kind of crazy one is beginning. So I feel like that I really liked the way that book just was like supporting women in their choices. And actually she was a pioneer, because she was literally kind of railing against, you know, all these kind of obstetricians, and, you know, you get your appointed obstetrician, don't you, in America, you know, that were kind of like quite didactic and, you know, authoritative and kind of making decisions for women. Certain things were on and off the table, and lots of hospitals have policies like nil by mouth of food and drink. So like you said, if you had a 36-hour labor, I mean, in my head, I find that I literally would just go as far to say that I think that should be against people's human rights. You know, what they're guarding against is the risk of you vomiting if you were to be put under general anesthetic in a C-section. Think how many C-sections you're going to have because a woman completely runs out of physical energy and isn't able to muster the energy to feel confident or to feel able to do it, or she has no emotional strength left or has no physical strength left to do it. So all of that stuff she really enjoys, you know, in a very subtle, very empowering, very respectful, very scientific, interestingly way. So you might not think a book about, you know, by a kind of like, you know, slightly quirky, you know, midwife would be anything but kind of a little bit hippie. Not at all. She really knows her medical stuff, and she's the first person to send somebody to hospital if they need that intervention. But she, from all these hundreds and thousands of births she's delivered, knows that should not, you know, that's not the best place for women to give birth. And that's the kind of message in there, that women do this, women can do this with their own natural bodies. The least interventionist approach is the best approach, and I fully believe in that.
Yeah, absolutely. And then it's perhaps a bit of a challenge. I like that bit in your story about right at the end, like when you described so beautifully that you were kind of in that zone. You were in a place that nobody could reach you. Space, because you had to do quite a lot of work to get to that place. Then you're trying to remember what the book says, whereas your body was telling you, I know how to birth this baby, and here he's coming. But yeah, it's quite, because sometimes you have to fight quite hard to get into that space. Then it's hard to kind of fully forget ourselves in labour, which is what we need to do. But I like the way you described that.
No, I think you just like to kind of just make sure I've kind of conveyed that properly. Is, I think, part of that journey with the VBAC, which was the kind of as I said, I don't call it my best birth, but was the birth that I wanted, my first choice of birth. I would say the theme of that birth, and obviously it didn't have the complications of him being breech, so that is a slight side note. But it was very much it's like a journey of instinct. I just shut out other people, other voices, and I just listened to myself and listened to my body and tried to kind of answer the questions for myself in terms of, well, actually, what do I want and what do I think is the best way? And for me, there probably were points in time where you say I was being kind of suggested not to have the birth I want. I think that's fair to say. I was being told that risk-wise I should go to the labour ward. I was explicitly told that. I ignored that advice, and perhaps you might say I got the birth I wanted because I ignored that advice. Not that I'm encouraging anyone to ignore, obviously, essential medical advice about kind of, serious health and safety risks. But I balanced the risks that I knew about with what my body and my mind was telling me, which was, you can do this. Like, you can have a natural birth. There's currently no indicators. Maybe midway through birth or at the end of birth there will be, and I'll have to have a C-section. That would be a different kettle of fish. But right now, there have actually been no indicators in this pregnancy that it wouldn't be a safe natural birth. So, roll the dice, so to speak.
Yeah. The other thing I love about the way you told your story is just so much of fact, like you just had a baby, basically. You set up the stage for your body to do what it can do, and then your body did it. And I think often when we hear stories, there's a lot more kind of drama or checking and monitoring, and whereas really in yours it just really came across that you're just, why not? Why would you not just have a baby as you did? Almost like it's the most normal thing in the world.
Yeah, that's an interesting point, because I suppose sometimes I think I'm a bit too much like that, and possibly take things in my stride too much. But like I said at the beginning, I don't tend to think very much. I tend to feel very much. So I felt my way through, because that's the way I make decisions. I feel that I can quite efficiently guide myself through my life by making decisions based on my instinct and always trusting my gut instinct. I don't find that to be wrong, really, ever. And I think that's inside all of us. So I suppose sometimes my message to people who may be a little bit more cerebral, a little bit more rational, a little bit more head-based, conversations I've had with friends about birth, is kind of just get into your body, get in touch with your body, with your physicality, your animal brain, which funnily enough actually is something that Ina is very into, like the animal part, like tap into that primeval part, because I think your point was quite funny about, like, just saying that I said it like it's kind of like, any old Tuesday just having a baby. Well, in a way it was any old day. It was Wednesday actually, but it's like, I'm not special, and that's a very important thing for me to remind myself, not only in daily life but also along this topic of birth. It's like, you're not special. 1 billion women have gone before you. 1 billion women will go after you. This is natural, like underscore natural, which is not to say there are not a small percentage of moments where really adverse, sometimes completely unpredictable things happen. But I think what Ina May's focus on in her book, which was so inspirational, is, but why is our focus therefore always on that tiny minority? Because that does happen. No one's denying that there are stillbirths and there are terrible things that happen to people, and it's not their fault, and it's not the baby's fault, and often it's not even the staff's fault. Nothing actually has gone wrong in terms of how someone was cared for. It's a terrible unfolding of terrible events, but actually, like, it's not a special situation, it's a natural situation. And like, when you kind of have that view of the vast majority of babies are born safely and happily into this world, it really makes you question why birth has become so medicalized in the Western world in particular. And I think that's what I was trying to channel in my thinking about it. I was trying to get out of my culture and away from that and into my primal, instinctual, maternal body.
Yeah, and it's so powerful, your story, and just the way you describe how you do that. You've already given us so many helpful reflections and wisdom. I'll just give you one last opportunity, if there's any sort of summing up or things that come to mind, just to pass down to people who might be pregnant listening now. You might not have, because you've already told us so much.
No. Yeah, I think it's just that I can only think of a word when you say that. I just think of the word trust. That's the word that I see very kind of like strongly in my mind when you ask that question. It's like, trust your baby, trust your body, trust yourself, trust your gut instinct, trust your judgment, trust your partner, trust your parents, trust your friends, trust your community, trust the doctors, the hospital. I think magical things happen when you trust, because in my view, I'm quite an optimistic person. Trust is part of being optimistic, like part of being hopeful. And I always think, if there's no reason to panic, don't panic. There'll be plenty of opportunity to panic if you need to panic, or to be anxious if you need to be anxious. But like, pregnancy is such a beautiful journey. Parenthood is the most like exciting, transformative experience of your life. Enjoy it.
Yeah, that's brilliant. Thank you so much, Ella. I really appreciate you coming to chat on the podcast.
Oh, it's a pleasure. It was so nice to talk. Thank you.
This podcast does not present itself as medical advice, and neither should it be taken as such. The views represented here are personal to the women telling their stories. Sorry for this slightly patronising disclaimer, but such is the world we live in today. Always seek out the information you need before making your own decisions.